Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm hoping that you have lots of juicy donor bits for us to work with. I'm just going to say a little bit, which is not nearly enough, about transformation, energies, and ways in the wheel that you might consider. First of all, I'll talk a little bit about the distinction, as I experienced or studied between Theravada and Mahayana. My sense is that the humanness of the Buddha is central in Theravada, and so is human agency. Our Mahayana says agency is somewhat different than anyone Prajna, the agent of the great function, capital D, capital F, of the universe. So there's emphasis in turning the wheel from being anti-effective forces or acting out the negative to being a wheel turner or a wheel turning king, you may call it. There's emphasis on relinquishment and on into extinction. Extinction is a really big term in Theravada. Now we have, New Year's Eve, we have relinquishment renewal ceremony, which is a blend actually of Theravada and our own way. So if you move to Mahayana, because we are just my cartoon a little, we're the all and everything school. And in one thing it's missing in this wheel that you should place there in your mind heart is that each realm has a little Buddha in it of specific laws and upaya and heart means for liberation that are appropriate to that realm. So there's that. So prajna is the great function of another kind of agency, more of a universal agency than absolute meeting a relative. And another key word, I'm a school mom, so I like these things that you can remember. There's prajna and there's pravriti. Pravriti should be chiseled somewhere or in a sampler in your kitchen. P-A-V-R-I-T-T-I. It means turning around in the fundamental seat of consciousness. Seat. Turning around in the fundamental seat of consciousness.
And that's to see yourself?
Everything, because everything in humans go through consciousness. There's a turning around, a revolution within that, and that's part of the transformation of the wheel. Now, in the big Kensho experiences, that of course, it isn't that Kensho's another aid or Satori is yet another experience. It changes the whole way we experience. So it goes into changing, of course, ignorance becomes wisdom, but the turning of the wheel, the potter in the wheel has a whole different shaping of existence and a whole different container in which experience is put. Now, you might go home and think in your portraiture of the wheel of yourself, where do I experience pravriti, or how do I encourage it in my life? The turning around on the fundamental state of consciousness. Okay, the other thing is, Dogen was a very unique teacher, of course. He said that the Buddha way was to go through the self, to the self, from the self, through the self, to the self. The three selves. Now this is a religion that, in the Theravada sense, you eradicate, you actually leave the human lineage and go to another more universal lineage. But from the self, through the self, to the self. Now, I was impressed by the talks because they had that role in them. Yeah, nobody really was abdicating their humanness in this, and in fact, we got all kinds of rich humanness. Then there was a really precise and heartfelt sense of processing all that. It's true that some person's clutter is another person's treasures. We got into that. But that's the Mahayana, in which there's no fixed view and no view that is substantial. So we had a nice play with that. Then there's to the self. He doesn't make a little big with any of those. They all have SSS. From the self, through the self, to the self. One more thing I might add, a natural image.
Could you say a little more about the third self? I get the first two selves. The third self is?
Well, it's the work through self. It's the self that has gone through pravriti, either in enlightenment experience or who's devoted to that process actually, or actually finds it happening mysteriously. And this is the last one I'm going to talk about. I'm going to use Dogen's reliance on natural metaphors and making them spiritual. But so I watch a lot of Discovery TV, and it's wonderful that they can photograph and observe animal behavior. And I love animal life. So they were showing the birthings of the sperm whale, and they are sea mammals that birth live. But the little, there's the big mama and the little guy, and they can't swim, nor do they have the inventor or the apparatus to go up to the air. Whales have to breathe in air, and then they go down. And so they just start sinking like a stone. Then mama goes under and goes, and then sometimes it slips off, and then it goes up. And I guess it's like a baby coming out of the womb. It learns to open its lungs. Then it starts sinking again. And this goes on for 2 or 3 days, I guess. The mother doesn't sleep during this time. And then somehow the apparatus of knowing that you're supposed to go up in order to be an amphibian and live in the air, and making whatever the tail and the flippers work, they learn to swim. But they don't know how to breathe in air, and they don't know how to swim. So I think that prajna has that quality. In our sangha, we have a joke. We have a lot of cartoon Zen jokes, but one is get out of the way so the prajna can do its work. It is the continuing work of the universe. So that's our joke. But let me give you an everyday example of somebody who has done it. In order to have prajna come up automatically, you have to do continuous practice. That's just continuous practice. So this is someone who has done devoted continuous practice and has an amazing capacity to arouse bodhicitta. So this person goes into a party with a bunch of people. They see a group of people over here and they think, oh, I know that group. And there's a whole litany memory of what that group is about or what the characteristics is. And then they say, well, I'm going to go get a drink because I don't really want them to see me. Half a second passes and they're marching right for the group, spreading their hand out, starting to engage in being commiserating with everyone with a glad heart. Now what happened in that parade? And it was faster than that. We always say one of our things is faster than a speeding bullet, but Superman catches the bullet and so can we. But then we do it because there is this universal force. That this person didn't say, oh, I have resentment, what is that on the Dharma list? Oh, I have to stop the moving train of my anger. Oh, I have to stop the fantasy or I'm getting out of here. That's one of my favorite escape strategies. That would take a long time and that isn't it. That's human willpower, which we know doesn't work. This is something different. So, okay, that's the end of that. Now I'd like to hear from you all. Somebody was going to tell me they were going to do yama. And it's usually a minute to start with.
Okay. So I want everybody to look at Yama with me, to just and look at your picture, please. Look at your picture of Yama. Huh? Oh, can you hear now? Sorry. So there, at first we think always at the top. I would say, look, always at the top. But he's not just at the top. He's holding the whole damn thing. And it's like it's his belly, you know. And his claws are up here. He's holding it with his fangs at the top, and he has two eyes, and then the third eye vertical, the transcendent view there. And he's got the whole thing in his hands. And so, I mean, just looking at that and the fierceness of it, and he's got knobby knees and fangy feet, and he's horny and terrible in every possible way. And there are those 5 skulls up there. I can't remember what about those, but
Those
the people who don't.
Who haven't resolved themselves.
Yes, yes. Right.
We don't want to be jewel in his
Yes, we don't want to be jewel in the crown in that sense. So I went from that to thinking, you know, what do I know about this. I mean, I volunteered to do it as an instinct, I guess. And then I realized, I had the experience of, you said, remember how the fang, talk about how the fang feels and how this works. So I realized that no sooner did I get a job here at our retreat than I experienced how it's always ever present. But before I tell that little story, I just want to point to a book I've been using that I like, that because it has a suit. He calls it Sutra Number 1. The book is by Glenn Wallace, and the title is The Basic Teachings of the Buddha. And it's a very useful, simple book. And the first sutra in his group of sutras that he picks out to unpack is called, I don't know if it's called The Quail and the Hawk, but that's what the little story is. So it's the Buddha's teaching. And the first is on the quail and the hawk. And the quail is, as we know, this little bird that doesn't fly high, it just flies close to the ground where it belongs. And in this story, the quail is caught by the hawk, those fangs, those claws. And so Death has the quail. And the quail looks up and says, it's kind of like a Brer Rabbit story, the way I saw it. And the quail looks up at the hawk, who's flying off with the quail, and says, no, put me down. You don't really want to eat me. You don't have to eat me right now. And the hawk says, why should I put you down? The quail said, because I know a way to escape from you. You won't be able to get me next time. And so it's sort of like it's like tricking you. It's kind of a trickster thing. But the quail says, let me just try it. So they have a bet. So the hawk says, okay, go. I can get you every time. And the quail goes, and the quail, in the story, as the Buddha says, the quail goes and disappears into the earth, is the phrase. And the hawk cannot catch him. And so the quail wins that bet. So that's the Buddhist story. And I'll just stop with that little story and tell you what happened. So the first job I remember getting at the retreat was I got assigned to be the helper in the kitchen. So I really like to cook, and I had experiences Tenso, and so my ego just was, the little greedy stuff starts to come out, and I go in, but and I have this recent difficulty with the head monk, where I come from, and so forth. So I'm happy to be there, and I'm actually pretty relaxed, and then here's the head monk in charge, and there's an indication that he might not know a lot about being Tenso, and so my little greedy thing comes up, of course, even more. And, but then I start to feel the fan, because I can feel the resistance in the situation to my stepping out, away from the earth. Myself is starting to leave the earth. This is the quail, right? And I start to invest, my ego starts to get invested in taking some kind of power in the situation. And I would say my karmic self starts to get its greedy paws on the situation. And as it turns out, this handsome, clever monk does know what he's up to. So he holds his ground, and the fang sets in on my karmic self, and I can feel it. I can feel that meeting, that karmic self meeting the fang of Yama. And I go, oh yeah. I vow to my job, which is to make the salad. I am given the job to make the salad, and I disappear into making the salad. And the wheel turns on. I mean, I wouldn't have said that to myself then, but I'm free. The minute I disappear into making the salad, I'm so happy. And all of that nonsense vanishes. And I'm able to come into harmony with the Tenso, and everything starts to roll, and it all vanishes in the dust. That's my So I know that happens all the time in my experience. I know when I'm clear, when I'm practicing, it's turning and I'm not even knowing that I'm free. But then I hit those, when that skeleton gets on my back. Then the whole thing starts to slow down and the fangs come out. Yeah. So that's it.
That reminds me of Buddha pointing to the earth. When Mara attacked him and said, who do you think you are? Knowing all the laws of the realm and all the bodies and all the ways of being free. And he said, earth is my witness. That's a beautiful story, thank you.
Yeah.
I want to take that back.
My guest.
My assistant used to be a professional quail.
I'm sorry. What did you say?
My assistant, my beloved assistant who lives with us
Yeah.
in her kitchen. She used to be a professional quail. Somehow she learned her life, and she put on her identity, and she was quail-like. She would follow me around and on and on.
Yes.
You know, and I was supposed to be a carrier of the Buddha Dharma,
Yeah.
and she just got quail-like. I would, did you hear that, Mommy? Quail was like a little big.
Yes.
I would just, you know, it would drive me crazy. So I had to sort of trick her. You know, Buddha was a positive trickster, tricking the lovers, positive things. But she over-embedded herself in nerves because she was doing everything. I think she was going to have a Buddhist nervous breakdown. By the way, there are certain kinds of breakdowns that only Buddhists have.
Yeah. Feels so good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you can.
you did it just so you had that finesse.
Well, but I learned that the hard way exactly as
So
you
you
said.
did that one too.
Yeah, but absolutely. Yeah, once I caught on that that's what the mechanism was like, then I did what you're saying your assistant did. I vanished in that way also. And it took I don't know how long, 20 years I mean, at this place.
Well, no. With her, in the Sangha, we had to go through, I don't know, 6 months at least, of her exploding into a warrior that was
Yes.
absolutely fierce as hell and
Yes.
screaming most of the time if you crossed her. This is a person that that's why she's done the breakdown. She took everything.
Yes.
Oh, you're serving.
Yes.
Really, that was, everyone got a kick out of it, really.
I'll take
That's
care of
good.
it.
They knew
You know,
it was
I mean, you
going
got
on.
kicked out of the suddenly the fully armed.
I think this is really an important point for people to understand is the turning and how, when you've been following one pattern and you're going to change, it doesn't come out very smoothly.
Oh, boy.
Instead,
Yes.
it comes out as a raging mess.
Yes, really, yeah.
And you have to congratulate people and say, yeah, well, now I can see you've been struggling with this and now you've decided to come forward and change that pattern. It's not going to be smooth. So we have to recognize and not just urge people when they're breaking free of that internal oppression and they're changing because it's not smooth. I remember in couples counseling, she said, just, you feel selfish in what you're asking for, but you have to go there, you know, and overdo it a little to get out of that victimized feeling.
I call it being operatic. Something is an operatic.
Yeah.
Operatic.
Yes.
Operatic,
Yes.
like,
Big.
performing, yeah, it's
Yes.
big.
Drama.
Yeah, you overdo it, but not on purpose you're overdoing it, just because you don't have any modulation yet in that behavior. It's coming up from infantile place where it was never refined.
Well, now I call her and she said, what do you want? You heard us, you know, and
You saying to her, what do you want?
no,
She says
I
it
call her
back.
and say, hi Carol, as I call her several times a day on the way. And she said, what do you want? Okay, I got your list, she likes me to be organized. I said, you don't have your list right now, do you? Soft shoe this stuff, I want the list.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, that's a very good breaking away from various kinds of yama tricks. There's a trickster, I always use the word trickster, quality. That's one reason I think in the Lord's Research that Buddha became several times a positive trickster. And I actually encourage people to out-trick the trickster. You know, a lot of these things we wouldn't even want the handing out a dream of eradication. You can't eradicate universals. I mean, you only compartmentalize it to get a relationship to it, but, yeah. I think there's another way to do it. So, if you want to try that practice, try to out-trick the trickster. You have to find out how you're tricked. What is your favorite way of being tricked or tricking others? And then what skills? It's an apaya skill to out-trick the trickster. You have to believe that delusion is real. There is a tendency now in American Zen that's horrified up where people call delusion confusion. I mean, they really take the fangs out of it. We are delusion making, self-system bound machines, I mean, that's what we do. And some delusions are better than others for a while.
Delusion-seeking missiles.
That's good. Write that down.
I usually speak of comfort-seeking missiles, but we're
No,
also
no.
delusion-seeking missiles.
That's it. Where's my favorite delusion when I need it? Well, your point about, we were talking about student-teacher relations, I was picking it up here. If the teacher is ironclad and clear in view and narcissistic, there will not be an allowance for this kind of transformation to occur. The raw material, the seed lives.
Yeah, another word for narcissistic is undeveloped or untested, as we just saw in our exchange when we tried to address the delusions in whom we witness, that the primitive material of anger had no foundation or stability or structure, so it just kept rolling on and on. Yeah. So even if a person isn't narcissistic, if they haven't worked through this at all and they fall back into it as part of practice, which we would hope that undeveloped things will happen, that they will fall back to it. And there's no structure there for dealing with anger. It still remains at a very primitive level. They can't work through it either at that particular moment.
Well, I was thinking about the teachers' narcissism and
All that.
If they can't,
Yeah.
if they can't let the draw from idealization and abdication and so, and they're feeding off of that,
Yes.
and then they blast the person or say, you are a disappointing man.
Yeah, I just had that.
Go over there.
I just had that, went through a loop with one of my students who had asked me to do a funeral service. And when the relative actually died, she asked someone else. And then said to me, I hope you're okay with this. Now, in that situation, you have to decide, now these are really important, how you're going to deal with this. Of course I'm okay with it, but am I hurt? You bet your sweet ass I'm hurt. And how much of that can the person handle? Right, so I say, I said, okay, I'm sorry for your loss, and you know, this works out well. And in regard to the question, which is, I hope you're okay with this, I just said, and I'm licking my wounds, which is to say, I can recover from this, but it isn't nothing. Of course, then the student came back and couldn't handle the fact that I was wounded and told me all the reasons why I should be okay with this. And I said, well, obviously when you said to me, I hope you're okay with this, you had some inkling that I might not be. Put yourself in my place. What would that be about? And we went one more cycle, which really helped. And I think this is the important thing, is that it isn't right. It's still not right. It isn't right. And one more round was somehow I've been feeling out of control, and having you involved felt like putting a controlling factor in. And so then I could see it was a move towards health. And then my pain, you know, my wounds were left. But we had to go through that process. And I said, okay, great, understood. It's funny to me that you see it that way, but now I can see what's going on, and I can appreciate that this is a process of healing that the student is involved in, and I feel fine. But I didn't feel fine until we went through all this. And unless you are trusting in the process and your own ability to modulate, because you don't want to add extra stress when someone's going through a funeral, right? You don't want to say, oh, wow, poor me, you hurt me. You know, that's not okay either. So this, how you aren't narcissistic and yet honest and are able to let this person move with the wheel and you can move with yours is very important. And you were going to say something about the process we went through.
I found it interesting when you said I was a witness with this person, and we worked through it that day, and the person seemed to come to some understanding, and then almost immediately the old behavior started arising again, because it seemed like it was only an intellectual understanding, and she hadn't actually gone through the process of change in a deep way. And it was almost immediate. It was I was shocked to see how fast
The
her
cover-up.
old behaviors and cover-ups came back.
Yeah, so the defenses came down very briefly. There was a lot of attacking that went on of me during the meeting, and maybe some understanding of, oh, I have a part in this. And then immediately, it all came back up again. So, but that's a process that your students will go through. They're not gonna just, oh, I got it, and generally, you're gonna be in it. You're not gonna be some innocent bystander. You're gonna be in their process, you're gonna be on part of Yama
Yeah, yeah.
and implicated. And you won't be innocent either. And you won't be guilty, but you won't be
They don't
innocent.
go entanglement for nothing.
No, and that's when we talked about entangling eyebrows, this is exactly it.
Isn't, just as you say, how did you say that? You said you are in Yama? Or what did
You are
say?
Yama.
Yes,
You're gonna be
Yama.
implicated as
Yes.
Yama.
Yeah,
As the
that's-
teacher, you'll be implicated as part of the Yama force.
And we internalize that. We are Yama in our own, what did you call it, continuous practice, in this devotion to the process. We individually, this process is going, and we're all learning how to do that. And I've been able to do what you just described doing with the student internally with myself, where I stick to my brands, just like the Tampa did, and said, you know, Miss Susan, just relax.
Don't try to take over this.
Just say this out loud.
It hurts our self-esteem if you're said that, if someone said to me, you remind me of my brother, and you know how I hate him. The only positive thing out of it was that, well, I'm enough of a Zen person, I can be mistaken for a male. Now, that's pretty good. Then it escalated, and the next round, it was, actually you remind me more of my father, and he abused me. So,
Yeah.
I mean, all my mechanisms of, this is too sticky, I must be doing something wrong, or I'm going to cool it, turn down the fire. But there is a whole lot written, by the way, on the fiery lotus, which I recommend people look up. And remember, I did read I can't remember the koan, but it starts out, when the person of riches goes into destitution, which can happen in a moment in us, and loses sight of who they are, then there is complete suffering. And then it said, had I known that it was the fire, this meal would have been cooked a long time.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Then we take the fire. We have to be initiated. We have to really trust that we've got enough, guard on that we're mature enough to go through that fire with our students. Yeah, with our students, so that we can survive. That we can both come out of it and survive it, because we can't go in that fire if we're going to lose our temper and harm the student. Or make them more enraged. Solidify the rage rather than use it. Yeah, we do have. And I didn't know where this dialogue was going to go when I said I'm licking my wounds. But I realized that I could hold on to that state of mind or not. How long did I need to lick, right, before they were going to be better? So by even describing it that way, it was a way of saying, I'm in process with this, but let's not fart around about what happened, what just happened here.
Would you mind saying when the person of riches, that
When the person of riches falls into destitution and loses a sense of who they are, and then that's stop, full stop. And then the teaching line from that is, had I known it was fire, this meal would have been cooked a long time ago. And I think it's breathtaking and very clear. So we need to be able to be in fire. I mean, we have the phrase, keep keep somebody else's foot, feet to the fire, so we teach you stance up there, and also keep our own feet to the fire, not like,
Well, there,
leap backwards like a spider,
Oh,
and
right.
not retaliate, no Italian's law.
right, you can't, and certainly not to retaliate, not to go into the cold zone either.
No cold.
Yeah, yeah.
But
That
reaching
cold
out.
zone, the cold zone is, what, me? You know, I'm a Zen person.
Yeah.
You can't hurt my feelings.
Yeah,
We can't go into the cold zone either, because that's not gonna be helpful. Something happened, and we did discover what it was that had happened in the projection that had led to this event, which was a projection and a response to that projection that was healthy.
Yeah, sure.
It was a movement, and when you can see that, and when the student can see that, then, okay, great, you hurt my feelings for good reason. There was some good stuff underneath here, there was some
That's
healing.
transformational, where things are not
Exactly.
substantially so.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it wasn't just about dissing me, it was about how you were finding your feet to make a decision that felt right to you, even if it did mean hurting me, and you could trust me sufficiently to do that. How good is that? You know, it's like when you're a parent and your children stand up and make decisions that you can't agree with, you have to applaud it in a certain, you hate it, but you have to applaud it at a certain level.
Like that, this is parallel what you spoke earlier about how messy it can get when we let go and we don't know what to do because we haven't ever done it really before.
Yeah.
And as a painter, that's, and what you're saying now about how we can back away when this difficulty arises, or hide, or all these things. And as an artist, it's so helpful to have gone through that process, because every time you start to develop a deep body of work, I'll say that way, it's chaos. You don't know what you're doing, and we call it transition. I mean, I don't sit around calling it that, but I mean,
You're in it.
if you talk about the creative process, that part is transition, and you think everything stinks. It's horrible, it's messy, you don't know what the hell you're doing, but you just keep doing it, and eventually it starts to make some sense, and you come out the other end, and you have to put that work in the drawer, because there's a tendency to want to throw it out, because you can't see any value in it, even though you know you have to go through this step over and over again. But if you put it in the drawer, some of the best stuff ends up in that drawer, but you can't see it until like a year later, maybe even, or something.
Yeah.
Because you just can't. You just
Yeah.
can't see it.
You can't see it in your practice either,
No.
when you actually made the turn, because there's all this messy emotion all around it.
Yes.
And then at some point you look back and say, oh, that's what was going on.
Yeah.
Oh, I was working through that conflict or the other conflict. But it is this is not psychology. This is what Gumshan said in the Jewel Mirror Samadhi. He said, turning away and grasping are both wrong. For it is like a massive fire. You can't back off from it and say, never mind me, it didn't happen. And you can't grasp onto it. Why haven't you do this to me? Turning away and grasping, or turning away and touching, are both wrong. So how do you stay close to the fire, be with it, and allow all of this to circulate and be insubstantial, and let it teach you? And this is essentially, the whole program that we're doing is about this. You learning how to be yourself and be authentic in practice, so that that's what you're communicating to others. You've been through the fire, and you've trusted practice as your compass. And when you've done that, everybody knows that you've done it. And if you haven't done it, everybody knows that. It's just blah blah. What you're teaching is just blah blah. Unless you've actually done it and trusted the practice with your life, it's just blah blah.
Where he says, have you ever heard of difference in unity that says grasping things is wrong, emerging with principle is still not
Yes,
right?
yes. To know that all is one is not enough. Yeah, that's in the Sangha Kai.
Or you could have, you wouldn't have had that turning around of having some harmony in the earth if you said, I'm going to be secretly I'll be adaptive on the outside, but secretly I'm
Yeah.
going to fight him, or all this stuff was, oh my
I'll
God,
show him.
I know that I'm wrong, and I didn't see it, and
You
this
can't
big
put on a
giant
quail
told me I
suit.
was wrong.
You
Yeah,
can't actually
you just-
a suit of quail. Quail mask.
You let the whole self
Yeah.
dissolve vertically and then come on in a different form, which basically I think is the Buddhist sense of transformation. It's between
Yes.
form. That's why
Yeah.
I would say from the self
Yes.
to the self to the self.
That's-
We don't go into the beyond, although really recommend something called Beyond Buddha, that's called Shogaku Zen, which is a really nice education into what those are teaching us about Buddhist beyond. Yeah, and that's shocking title. Beyond Buddha? What if I can't stay with Buddha? What can I stay with? I mean, if I can't idealize my Zen practice, what kind of idealize? Well, sure. Then on the end, when Suzuki, toward the end, is a wonderful deconstruction of idealization. That's a pretty dangerous thing. So we can't merge with principle. Can't even merge with ideas. If we're in this frontier and get closer to the house, as Cuddy already said about oneness, it will throw us on our ear all the time because we have a tendency to foreclose as humans. That's what we do, foreclose. Yeah. We go, oh, I had this experience. And then that leaves the hinterlands and the outside and the other. And so the dynamic is the other comes slamming in, so when we least expect it. Small or near, maybe small or big, near or far, that's where it is. Then we think, oh, I'm not having that kind of experiences. Actually, we are having the right kind of experience. Yeah. Who else would like to say what they worked on? Yeah.
I worked on intention in the fourth round, where the two men in the boat. I think they're actually so closely they're women.
Women and the grandma.
And I kind of, it's sort of it's just sort of a riff. I mean, I just kind of stream of consciousness on myself. And it occurred to me that intention is the natural order of mind. That came to me when we were chanting this morning. And that we are, that with that, in that place of intention, we are free from pre-paid conclusion. It's not that we willfully separate ourselves from pre-paid conclusion, but there's freedom with it. And intention comes from deep inside. It's not a cognitive thing. And it's like this: after the rain and wind and the clouds, the clouds clear and the sun comes out, and everything is very clean and fresh. There's a sort of a sense of refreshment, and there's a clarity of vision. You can see the surroundings very clearly because the dirt has been washed off, and it's kind of sparkling, and so therefore you can go forward reasonably see clearly. And I love the thing of the two people in a boat with, and there is someone there who is unseen, who's guiding, who is standing and seeing and guiding, and but it's maybe not visible in a sense way or a cognitive way to the people in the boat. And I thought about a pilot in a ship, the role of a pilot in a ship, making soundings and reporting to the captain, and the kind of the sure guide, sense of the trustworthiness of the guide. The guide has a kind of knowledge and experience, which is wisdom, and it's trustworthy, clear-sighted, and steadfast, and helps us go to the other shore. It's a deep instinct that becomes clarity. It's not an imposition of some idea. And I have had this experience of deep intentionality coming forth in the way that I described it in the weather after a fight with my husband, or after, I'll tell you about an encounter that I had with my daughter, and it was, oh, and I want to say something else about intention. It's inherently kind and helpful because it is in the place, it is the, from that place of wisdom and compassion. And it's also kind, there's a character quality of not too much and not too little. So yesterday, I had checked in for my flight this morning, and my daughter sent me a text saying, I've just seen the midwife, and we need to talk. And so I called, and she said, you know, my cervix isn't changed, and so we've scheduled an induction for a week from tomorrow, which is next Saturday, week from today. And so that will happen if I don't have a baby before then. I don't think you should come tomorrow. And so, and I had gotten quite a bit in touch with my longing to be there. And part of it is because I always have this sense about my children that I can see when I go there and things okay. You know, I can tell somehow. You know. And this has been something that has been an instinctual thing for me ever since they were very, they were, you know, newborns. This child, this 38-and-a-half-year-old woman, had a very severe life-threatening illness when she was 3 weeks old. I knew that she was sick because she stopped breastfeeding. And my husband, who was a pediatric resident, didn't know she was sick. And I had to find a way to get somebody to come over and see her so that, and so I said, can we at least call one of his colleagues? You know, can he come over and look? And he immediately said she needs to be hospitalized. She survived that. Later, she had other, you know, health issues, and I always felt about her this kind of, you know, delicacy, this fragility. And so I need to put eyes on her now. And so I had this strong need, and she called and said, I don't think you should come. And I said, you know, so when we talked about it a little bit, she said, I would be feeling like, I'm going to work from home next week, and I would be feeling like I have to take care of you if you come. And I have to entertain you and, you know, find interesting things for you to do. And I said, well, one of the things is that, you know, that one of the reasons that my being so close to your sister has been that she's always been able to know that I can take care of myself, and therefore I can come around there. You know, she doesn't have to take care of me. So don't worry about that. And she said, well, you know, another thing is that Alex is my husband. Her husband is a very private person, and he's used to his privacy. He works from home, and he's feeling nervous about the fact that our life is going to change so much, and all of a sudden there are going to be all kinds of people, you know, coming into our house, into our life. And I said, okay, you know, I do that, and I understand that that's the kind of person he is. And I said, I really need to say that I am experiencing a strong need to be there, you know, and I think it's really important that we both be completely honest with each other and tell each other what is going on with ourselves. So that's what's going on. So she said, well, you know, let me talk to Alex, and then let's talk later, because she had just come from the midwife and she hadn't told him this news yet either. So fortunately, the next thing for us on the schedule was a period of zazen. So you know, I took my hurt and my fear, my sadness, you know, into zazen, and you know, and in the process of, you know, turning towards that and really, you know, seeing it, you know, in zazen, you know, the bigger picture arose, and I realized what is best for her is that I help her. And so I called her. She was on voicemail, and I said, you know, I thought it over, and I feel more clear on this issue, and I realize it's best that I don't come, you know, and I love it. And the experience is that you know, when the clouds clear, the intention of what's best for everybody comes forward. It's not forced. It is revealed. It's revealed, and I can hold my fear and my and you know, my sadness. I can hold that, but and not impose it on her, you know. But it's real. It's definitely there. And the prajna, the intention is the guide. You know, it's the guide that shows me where to go. So
It's like turning around.
yeah.
And from another place than the feelings you would expect, right? You knew the feelings you had to expect. You know, they were familiar about what happened back here. I knew you another way.
And you know, my love for her, of course, is the most important thing.
Well, I also chose, and I went to a completely different place with, I was kind of doing 4 and 5.
What is 4?
4 and 5, the boat and the sense doors, or the adverting.
House.
But then in the process of trying to go in both directions, you know, like what's this based on, and trying to explore. Well, for one thing, I wasn't thinking of intention as being only the positive. I was thinking of, so what the image I had was like going through the intention to find the familiar, so that the sense doors would sort of open to the familiar somehow, like, which that was the image I had. But what I wanted to bring up was, I don't understand a couple things. I mean, I don't understand a lot of it, but I realize there's certain things I really don't understand. So I wanted to bring up, so for example, if I want to take something like my anxiety, like something happened and my anxiety comes up. Is that a samskara, and then I explore it that way, or is that more of a self being born?
Well, why don't you start right here? So
Right,
What
so-
way is it angry?
So if I feel, I was trying to explore it in samskara, and so so something happens and I just feel anxious. And so I'm thinking, oh, maybe that's not a self yet. Maybe you have to have more of a story before you get to the self or something. So maybe, but then it goes to consciousness. Like, I just can't, I don't understand how, then, so I have the anxiety, and that creates a kind of consciousness that's colored by anxiety.
It can have the same, like that kind of redundantly. But if you have the anxiety, notice that this is a registration mind. It registers and it lets in, it adverts in and out.
So that's already to the sense door then, in a way.
It isn't, sense door is sort of a misnomer.
Or the fourth point rather than the second.
It lets in all kinds of things, or closes all kinds of things, but if you're standing, it's a long-term practice to get clarity of when you can stand on the threshold of the door and seeing it swing. So if you just say, what am I arranging and moving toward, and what am I also shutting out? Remember, we always want to do things double, twice,
Right.
different
So-
directions.
so-
The ego doesn't like that. It likes to do single nuggets and throw everything away. So if you stand in a liminal state, somebody mentioned liminal state, right, you call it. You stay in the liminal state, you find the threshold where the reaching hand of thought and object making is not, you can see it go by and go, just like keep the car steady. And then if you see where it's going, you also see what you're leaving now. You have to see two things. Once you see that, then your consciousness will not be as polluted. It won't be as programmed. So there are
So
moments.
in the negative turning, it would go from anxiety to a sort of colored by anxiety
Yeah,
consciousness to an intention to look for a substantial basis for that anxiety.
And then
And
everything
the doors
looks
would
similar.
open only to the things that correspond
Yeah.
to the base of.
And then your memory bank changes because you have a memory bank that matches, like Velcro.
Right.
What the feeling tone is. And perfuming, you know, is from reasonable.
Say that again?
Perfuming, it's like
Yeah, that's right.
gas. Everything smells the same. You don't see gas.
Huh.
Our aquifer at the farmer's just poison.
So in one way, the anxiety is something's happening that's threatening to the images and self I've created.
So the ignorance would be ignoring connectedness. Ignoring the connectedness side, there's a separate self, and then there's immediately anxiety.
Yeah, but if I think that Trungpa said, you know, that anxiety is kind of the gateway to awakening.
And
If
it's
you
the
can
open source,
stand it,
yeah.
yeah, if you can stand it and see, I'm gonna be with it and let it be, what will come out of it often is it's a precursor to a big transformation. If we don't use the usual methods to cover it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does make sense to me right now. I don't quite get, I see the door opening and the, you know, like you said, the thought gets attached. and
Letting certain
fear.
things in and opening to certain things.
Okay, and then what's the other part?
The other thing is certain things are left out at the same time. That's the non-duality. We have to see, if we only see one way.
So we're supposed to look at what is left out?
Yes, that's
Okay,
what
then.
because adverting means turning, open, close, and consciousness is organized around picking up one thing and illuminating, yoga says, and the rest gets thrown into the void. So for all our wonderful phrases about the conversion of consciousness and all that, if we don't do these non-dualistic practices and stand the tension of seeing two opposite things. Now, the other one's over here, and you know, sometimes if you're really congratulating somebody, they'll say, he has no back. Maybe he's has 360-degree capacity of returning, which is what this is.
So in the context you're raising, tell me the parts. I want to see the parts. The letting in and what you're not
Grace
looking at.
pointed out, she has to stay with, she has to be in the being with virtue.
And not invoke the other parts of the wheel that are familiar patterning to make that anxiety go away. Because when we feel anxiety, it's very linked in the human body to danger. And we have ways to make that anxiety stop. So those are the thingamajiggers on the wheel, the parts that we'll invoke to make that anxiety stop. If we can hang out in the anxiety, it's a transitional state.
So a very good exercise in portrait of the self. Anxiety. What is my favorite style of anxiety? Anxiety presents a little differently. Or is it situation bound? When I'm with my daughter and children, do I have these kind of anxieties? What happens when they hit? When I have to give a talk, and then you fill in the blank. So you get to know, and you keep going over, you let it sit, and then you go back to it, because the consciousness in its CJ and run style goes da-da-da-da-da, fill in the blank, and then stop. Yet there is this tremendous truncation of freedom and this tremendous studdiness that occurs.
And that's when you use consciousness in that, do you mean the third link?
I think.
So that's the, what did you call it?
Yeah, it's
slogan.
constructed, construed.
But you had a little slogan that you just did that was
the turning around.
the Dick Jane, the
fundamental
C.
seat.
Dick Jane.
There's the lotus seat, finding our seat, and then there's turning around consciousness in its fundamental seat.
But when you said the C. Dick Jane, that's sort of like the diluted consciousness is just simplistically, let's, okay, there's the anxiety, let's go where we're familiar, let's shoot this whole thing out, and, you know, we'll get to a self.
Or let's just stop everything, because that is playing dead is an animal reaction. I was great at playing dead. Some people said I never quite got over it. I was really concentrating. Are you there? Oh, yes, okay.
Playing dead or playing
Playing dead.
omnipotent? Either one.
Yeah,
It
well,
was a way of conquering anxiety.
Yeah.
So the energies are the volatile energies are very, very swift. So can I ask you here?
Yes.
And now, what is your usual habitual way of responding really fast to anxiety?
I think I run away pretty much.
And do you run away from it, or do you make it smaller?
No, I try to get just as far as I can from whatever's happening.
And what's your favorite cave? Or, you know, say we're gonna,
Oh, distracting activities.
oh,
probably.
distracting,
Doing stuff.
Buddhist stuff, yeah,
But not it Buddhist stuff, but more like, you know,
activity, okay.
activity or computer games or busyness or
You know,
surfing the web.
You know, the tension sometimes creates something not between being and doing. That's always encouraged in our culture, what we're doing. And, you know, there's this famous
Yeah.
phrase, trying is not doing. There's a real doing, and then there's another, there's compensatory doing, like you're saying.
Yeah. I think it's, yeah, I mean, it's not, I don't feel that all my doing is that. There's
No,
not,
of course
there's so
not.
much doing.
Exactly. Yeah, no, no.
Different kinds of doing. But yeah, when I get scared, like I was in a situation recently where this person was really, someone I'm very close to was really scaring me, and I was not saying anything. And I was, the more scared I was getting, the more I wasn't saying anything, and then I would get more and more scared.
Yeah.
And finally I said to myself, you are very vulnerable in this situation. And then I was, you know, that was sort of the release. You know, oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you were
That's all I was trying to say.
That's the turning around consciousness, you were present.
That's all I was trying to say here.
Brought your consciousness to do a basic registration with clarity that helped you.
And then I was able to say it to him for something,
Yeah.
because I was afraid of, in a way, I was afraid of that, just flashing it out at them, you know. But once I was sort of like digested a little, I was able to say it.
Well, that's a good point about the skillful argument, or the skillful response to someone who, there's a contagion when people are ill, which we all are at various times, but really dangerously ill, or they're escalating.
I think that's part of what was
Yeah,
going on with her.
contagion.
I was picking up her anxiety, and yeah,
Which is why I tell my students, be sure you know what's going on with you first before you try to engage with someone else.
Yeah.
Because of this, it'll make it worse if you're coming from a reactive place and you haven't dealt with your anxiety about what's happening.
right.
So
Which
how-
could include you're justified in being anxious in
No
this
question.
situation.
Yeah,
It
but-
does- I think I was going to kind of, fear is not awakening, therefore it's not justified, therefore I should try to soothe myself. So I was kind of doing that, soothing myself, relaxing, breathing into it, all that stuff. But
But also
it was a
rational.
point of like, wait a minute, there's, you know, you're really vulnerable because you're a
Yeah, and
human
those
being.
those initial steps may have enabled you to make the turning around, the self-soothing,
Yeah,
the,
that's true.
okay, come on, this is off the charts.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah,
calm
right.
down here. And all of that, it's, you know, part of the
Yeah,
process
true.
of finally
True,
settling
takes
in.
some time,
Yeah, didn't that let her stay on the threshold?
I think it might have,
Yeah.
I should have to
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
I mean, it could have taken her away, but it also, there's only so much we can ask of ourselves
Yeah.
in terms of withstanding pain, anxiety, and suffering. So
And
if
if
we
it
have a
doesn't
little
work,
compensatory work we're doing with it, chocolate shopping, computer games, but our intention is to always
Yeah.
come back to it, that's the best we
Yeah,
can do.
yeah, for sure.
Well, two
It
more
takes
things
over
I'm
time.
talking, everyone else could take in, and one is, what are your favorite escape modalities? That may be underneath the water of consciousness, you know. The other is, how do you rationalize? Being a Buddhist is citing scripture to yourself is a great practice, you know.
Especially, yeah.
But those two, if we know that much about ourselves, we know, we face what we're in. It's the first thing, of course, we present what is. That's close to home, what is, and things as they are. The next one is, are we in various parts of ourselves staging or have already leapt into an escape? Once we get into the escape, it closes down and says, you know, that's everything. Because states have a tendency, they have their own greed to take completely over, every state does.
Their own which
Their own greed.
Greed.
They have their own hatreds or hostile.
They want to survive, others they have survival
They have
instincts.
their delusional span, so.
Yeah, survive.
And then there's rationalization. Rationalization is a misuse of the mind.
And I think it's
Very intelligent.
It's really important for Buddhists to hear this because some of you may have already realized this about me, but I have realized I am not Mother Teresa. And you may have known that before I did.
It's not
But,
good.
yeah, right, so all of us are aiming for some of these
Yeah.
images of Buddhists in our minds, and we ain't.
Yeah.
So accepting that and then being where we are, we can actually do something, but as long as we're, oh, I should be like Mother Teresa in this moment, come back, there's a part of me I haven't stepped on yet. But that's not my thing, so I can't do it, but we all have an image somewhere of what we should be as a good Buddhist,
That's
which is
very good.
really harmful to us and others.
Spot controlling images that may be sugar-coated or idealized images. They may appear as good, they're not. Controlling images that do not appear as Yama. Yama does not appear as Yama. It's unseen. That's the first thing to learn. Also, there's a trick and manipulation involved.
Could you repeat those two things? Because I think I put them all in one or turned. And the first thing is to recognize, know your escapes.
Things as they are. To recognize what you're in. What is actually
What is
arising.
actually
I mean, that was the
happening,
first
not
right
making
movie,
up.
Abhijama. They left out the I and they say, pay attention to the arising. Be in the arising. Learn concentration with the arising. Yeah, the next thing is what are the set or your favorite escapes? And track it. Use the original Buddhist sign of an adept. 17 thought moments are stayed with. Then they got their epaulets, then they got their flying orders. It's really, 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 really very important. And then there's the rationalization systems, which sound very good and are very intelligent. We have to realize how intelligent delusional systems are. They are the height of our intelligence.
It really, the use of rationalization to support self-identity, I mean, really strong.
Oh, very, very.
Seems are right, yeah.
Well, it feels like our ego's with us all the way through this project, right? I mean, this is going to be the best of all.
Yeah,
This
all
is
these ones I've
going
had,
to
this
be
is
the
the best
best
one.
ego I've ever had, and I'm going to be able to stick with this one. Right? So it's always going along
Yeah,
with
it
the
ain't going
project.
anywhere.
The others have left me down, but this one.
That's the perfect self, now I'm there.
That
Yeah.
sounds like a Lordism.
One of our chapters, best ego yet.
Does that drift us right into the guard room then?
Yeah, yeah.
I call that, I've got it made mine. I mean, I see it on the paper somewhere.
Well, yes. We have a man who circled you around the Zen Center who is an enlightened fellow. Very hard to deal with. So Carol gets now, because she's recovered the Army officer, the wounded vet in her. She was thrown off a tank at 40 miles an hour on the Belfort. She was an Army officer. Then she was a nun for 27 years. Now she's social worker. And now she's reversed our roles. She used to be asking me things all the time. Now I ask her. She's arranged this. I agree. So, what was I going to say about that? Tell me what I was saying.
You're talking about the enlightened man,
Yes.
and how hard it was to deal with people that are
Yeah.
enlightened.
And he brings paraphernalia of like a Tibetan newly found of enlightenment, and he actually got Carol over to his office, which I really disapproved of, and showed how Zen it was. He's a chiropractor. And he brings in texts for us to read, and I pointed out to him that one of the main texts was by Osho, who's actually still has poisoned the water in Antelope, Oregon, and has, had 7 of those verses. I think he died before he could redeem himself, but there's still a warrant out for his arrest, But this man is stalking us with his enlightenment. And he's very mad that we're so not in the know. Or not confirming.
You don't
him.
recognize his
He is
enlightenment.
very comfortable with his ego.
That's another way of putting it.
It's
like an insult or something.
But it's
Yeah.
disguised,
Like that's
it's
like a
disguised
curse.
as a Buddha, that's the problem.
Yeah,
And
it's
what,
curse.
that's the sort of ultimate delusion that we get to when we bring our ego into the practice. It disguises itself.
It's disguised itself, yeah. Trickery and disguise is one of the main functions of Yama. And it does kill. You could just say, okay, where's the killer lurking in me? Where have I taken tremendous losses to parts of myself died, or I mishandle a situation with people in jeopardy, or that gate where we almost make a huge mistake, or we make it, we have to undo it quickly. That takes a lot of courage to stay with those things and bring them back without conventional reactions like shame.
Well, even with them, I mean, we can't avoid them. We'll have a conventional shame reaction, we have to
Maybe
handle with that
sure.
too. Yeah, it's not like we can, I don't think we can process these things perfectly. In other
We just
words, all
don't
the
need to be
stuff.
a card carrier with the shame part.
Yeah, well, we have to recognize it as another one, yet
Yeah.
another hideout.
There's a whole issue of domination on the 9 to 11 with the negative gods. The warrior gods dominate the humans who are in a pleading, beseeching. They're stripped down, they're naked, and
When you're in that realm, are you either one or the other? Or are you just the
they're
people throwing the arrows?
Actually, at some point you will flip.
I see, that's why you never the sadomasochism.
But both can be redeemed. That's why I'm making a joke about Carol. Carol is a pretty good warrior now. And I always told her when she was obsequious with me, I said, we need the military here, Carol.
I want to say something, by the way, that Diane told me that some of you she may not have announced publicly, that Carol has given permission to be spoken.
Yeah, right. That's part of her gift.
So y'all should know that,
Education, yeah.
that she has agreed to be used as an
Yeah.
example and talked about personally.
I heard she talk about this all the time in her Dharma talk. She thought she would never give a Dharma. Who's never giving a Dharma talk? How many a year we're never going to have a Dharma? But she also gave permission to put her experience into the educational flow, which I think is great.
I was working with the New Dog realm, and I was thinking that we're both, and there's a conflict between vow and all the stuff that shoots us down when we assert the vow. Like when we're sitting and practicing with Zazen, for example, I thought about it that way internally.
So can you say more about that, Paul?
That make the intention for bodhicitta, and that's the humanity in us. I think we can only make that intention from the human realm. And then the angry gods come out with their arrows and stuff, and we're naked and vulnerable in that intention. And maybe there's a part of us that doesn't like that, part of me that doesn't like that. So the angry god part of me comes out and shoots it down and distracts me or seduces me or does something to kill off the humanity or that humanness until I remember that that's what happened, and then I can reassert the vow again.
Are you talking about the Titan forces fighting among themselves? You go into a Titan mode to fight the Titans?
No, I wasn't thinking about it that way. I was thinking it more about that the humanity in me that's capable of making the vow, intention to raise bodhicitta, gets shot down by the Titan, and that it's partially protective. Because to assert one's humanity is a very naked and vulnerable place to be, and it's part of our intention. But ego is like really a tough cookie. If ego thinks that there's going to be some letting go, he sends the Titans out with the arrows to shoot you down again, and you have to keep getting back up and asserting it out.
That's a good point. When have you perceived that you were in spiritual progress, as when going back to Kali, we know enough about spiritual progress, and actually got shot down internally, not from authority, but from yourself, but in the way you're talking about.
And I'm interested in the particular Titans that you've created that shoot you down.
Well, cynicism is a very big one.
Aha, you use some intellectual tools
Yeah.
to make fun of yourself
Yeah.
and to say you're getting too big for your britches.
Well, yeah, that's another big one.
That's what
Arrogance
happens.
is a big one.
Arrogance?
Yeah. Stupidity is a big one. I think arrogance and stupidity are two sides of the same coin.
Could you give me a couple lines of arrogant talk? self-talk,
Uh,
fresh off the press?
Well, like I said before, I got it made mine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll share an example. Years ago, I was going to give a talk, and I guess I was pretty anxious about it. So I was walking downtown on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and my head was going around about the talk. So I was completely oblivious to the environment. And all of a sudden, at one point, just as I was finishing crossing the street, a cab that almost ran me over, the cabbie yelled out the window, "Wake up!" Anyway, I tripped on the curb, and as I was going down, I missed a pile of dog shit. So I got up and said, "Yeah, I'm not present at all. Totally not present. You're walking down Midtown Manhattan in the rush hour. That's a pretty dangerous business sometimes, you know." And brought me back to the moment. So the preoccupation is, I guess that's another one, preoccupation. Keeps me out of the present, and that's to be very safe for contentment.
By the way, cocooning is Shogaku Zen's term. We've been using it. She's quite a it's where the silkworm weaves beautiful silk that comes out of its own being, and it kills. It never makes it. It gets crushed by its own creation. The cocoon. Because our ego, one of the characteristics of ego is it likes to be contained. That's why our thought will go up and then stop and then go close. It likes closed circle instead of, this is a closed circle rather than the end zone, then an open circle.
Yeah, it likes to be complete.
Right?
Rule making, that's fun.
That's your titan.
That's
What's rule-making?
I tied it to the potter.
To the what?
To the potter on the
Oh, the potter.
of the Nirvana of the potter, because they keep bringing up the same titles over and over again.
Right. The potter is known as for redundancy of the container, their whole container. So that's outside of awareness, of ordinary awareness. It's like I was saying, in the play, there's a spotlight, and first the audience is mesmerized to the lit world, and then we get a sense of the characters on the outer. They're always there, and all the scene changes where it's about to happen or have happened. And then by the third act, we know more than the hero, which is part of the construction of the play.
This is like the pot. It's like a fish swimming in the pot with the pot being in the ocean. And we can't see the pot. We're perfectly content to be swimming inside of it until we have an experience of the ocean. Then we become aware of the pot.
Would someone speak to the illusion of wanting to be complete?
It's a desire for containment. Like the extra, you know, the mother and the chick, mother hen and the chick story. The chick, even if it's ready to birth and going to the next stage, is hesitant to stay in the shell. That's why the pecking starts. There's a listening for the heartbeat of the chick.
But can there be a completion that's not contained?
There are stages of partial completion, butterfly. You know that if you know the cow going through the lattice window, colon, that tail in your relative world remains black. And if you can accept that, you won't get fantasized in yourself about the fantasies of completion.
Yeah. I would say using the
There's
term.
partial completion in certain ways. Obviously, we stabilize things so they're automatic. Or prajna is universal. If we realize that it's prajna providing the spaciousness and changing our intent so we don't project onto the people in the party and we don't, our feet intend to go this way and suddenly, of course, engages us with people and makes us happy to go forward. So that's prajna, that's not our ego in that sense. But this is a very good point you make about that, because there is a constant tendency of wanting to be in the nest and in the shell, and there's kind of arrogance about that completion. However, a lot of our prompters and a lot of our ideals in Buddhism is about completion, which is different than perfection. It has to do with wholeness, which rose and fell in the Aquarian age as an ideal, as it wasn't handled. But you might think of that. When are certain skills or understandings mature enough to operate, being, it's like osmosis. The cell membrane receives information and nutrients from the outside, and there's a constant exchange. Well, if the ego is trained, the ego exchanges like that with prajna.
Huh.
There is science.
It's permeable. It's permeable. Yeah, and the completion that I was referring to is this tendency to secrete a non-permeable membrane and say, okay, I've got it. I've got it. And this is why a very important expression is even the Buddha and Bodhidharma go on practicing. So it's that permeability and the continued process. It's the verb sense. And when you get to saying, okay, I've got it, you know what you've got. Your ego's got you.
It's as if the ego wants to believe that its perceptions are the definition of reality.
Absolutely. And
That's the big game of Las Vegas ego, I call it. Las Vegas ego. You come to the time of money, it's got a lot of hope, it's going to cover all the stops, and then it has to, at 3 o'clock in the morning, go sell its car to get more money.
to get a bus ticket home.
The bus ticket home.
So earlier, when you were saying about I'm not Mother Teresa, and how that can be damaging for people to sort of, I don't know, assume
Glom
those
onto
sort
an
of-
image of completion and perfection, a Buddhist image.
Right,
This is what I'm supposed to be,
right.
and I'll be okay within that.
But then don't we have, my question then is, don't we have, I think what we're saying is we don't want to have this like sense of finality. We do have archetypes and stuff that, and even people really that inspire us and sort of, maybe we strive to make us better.
Well, what Diane was just saying about the ego is that the ego wants to take over its function. There's nothing wrong with the ego as long as it has its place. So the ego, when it gets into Buddhism, will take the props of Buddhism to create a different kind of ego. So as long as, oh yeah, we're reading about these people and we're inspired by them, fine. But when the ego gets its grimy little paws on it, it becomes something else. It becomes a protection, a defense, an identity that seals us off. Yeah, of course. And it's, the main thing is for you to be, Adam Teresa, not Mother Teresa. Be the Mother Teresa that you are, not, and that's an ongoing process, not taking the ego, taking on another identity and saying, yeah, now I've got the perfect ego, and I'll be this. And then once you do that, you close off actually what's going on, as Mary Ellen said. It will define reality instead of being in reality.
I just flashed on that. There's a line in Zen Mind Beginner's Mind where she says, we should be really happy when we get discouraged because that shows us our gaining idea. In a way, I think if I'm trying to be Mother Teresa, I'm going to be getting discouraged.
She did.
It's not
Yeah.
seamless. It's not going to be the ego. It's not going to be seamless. And
And
so I'm going to be glad when I'm getting discouraged.
you're all perfect enemies.
How many people read Mother Teresa's letters? Abject
Oh, yeah.
disappointment. She was
Doubt.
not the
Doubt.
Christ was not her husband. God had let her down. She let God down. It's absolutely horrendous. But true. I don't even know how a lot of them are published. Maybe they're published. But disappointment, that's a good one. Inequality of dharmas, of course. He kept teaching that this is an equal dharma to getting lifted by hope. And so you actually forces you down in the lower realms too, which we are not as happy going. But in the mature, I keep going back because I study mythology. In the mature hero myth, the hero leaves the castle and does all that, and has sometimes a shaggy horse and sometimes a steed. dim-witted, guide, sidekick, not John. Americans are more idealistic. By the middle, there's a lot of games, and then either the animal, the ski, turns and starts talking and saying, "You have to kill me." And that, "You're my best friend, how you take me everywhere. No, you have to kill me." You have to get beyond the greedy delusion and of you have tremendous ride with the instincts. And then, or a bouncing ball, or a woman who's a lower caste person in that sense. And then the earth just opens. And they have to take off their crown and take off their covered feet or send it off, take off their ermine, their armor and their ermine caves, and they have to walk down into the underworld. And every realm, there's multiple realms, not one realm that they can control and close. And they all have different laws, and there's no free learning that will apply. So one training for that is to purposely walk into the underground by saying, "This is a dharma that can help me." I'm practicing two things. I'm practicing the equality dharmas, and I'm practicing fearlessness. And I'm in the mystery of not knowing what will happen. But by now I'm on the threshold of the known world and this gap that is instructed by my loyal animal instinct guide that I have to go there.
The wonderful thing that we love about these myths is that on the journey, actually, our hero does somehow reach completion. And unfortunately for us, what we recognize is this is a circular and repetitive process where you have some realization, you have to go down into that underworld again and again.
You also have to be always awakened within mystery. That's one of the things that you really learn. And not just this grasping and closing into the known. You have to bring treasures back that are appropriate to the community. You have to be a changed human. And it's that presence in the world that allows others not to be separate and blind.
Yeah, and willing to go down again.
Yeah.
Willing to go down.
Willing to be a guide to the underworld. They don't become other guides. But I think this thing about completion, I do think that the positive side of completion can also be stated in terms of stages. So we acquire the 37 stages and 47.
So you can have some completion
Yeah.
along the way.
Enough. You know,
In
it's
any
like
given
Oreo
moment.
means enough.
Yeah.
And there is actually a poem called the Not. Is it Langshan? Langshan's enough. It's actually Carol Swing's where she's always got people calling from California.
What is the
California.
poem?
Yeah.
I'll send it to you. Okay. But or I just mentioned Oreo means enough.
In what language?
In what? Well, Oreo is Japanese.
I'm not sure.
Well, that's.
I was told it means just the right amount.
Well, that's
Just the
right.
right
That's
amount.
right. Just the right
I
amount.
don't-
So.
I don't know.
Yeah, I
These
know.
simple
I have to look at the
physical
characters.
things we can take of what is just enough courage in the face of fear. What is just enough being with ourselves so that the next stage will open automatically. We can't say, "Earth open sesame, I know my next stage." We don't know anything like that. And there we are. Something. What time is it?
Yeah, so Barbara's here, and you want to have any concluding remarks or concluding questions?
Well, from my colleague James, 3 points and a poem. So I got a little more than 3 points, but I got the poem. And I don't know if there's enough to you, I'm sure have a
Copy it.
copy, yeah. This is on a stiff paper, I don't know if you have that.
No.
Okay, well, it was.
We'll share.
Okay, yeah, you can share, here. Yeah, I probably will.
One of your days off, you'll go get copies of Major Town.
Oh, yeah, and if you could, so do it on stock paper, I think it's called, or?
He won't do it, someone else will.
Oh, whatever, somebody wants to do it. All right, here we go. I picked one, so, Grace and I are reading. I I'll give, so that they can take those home. Yeah, when you come to the center.
There's more here.
We want to share.
That's another, oh, oh, here, okay, there's more. Yeah, got one, okay, we'll do this, then we'll leave, okay.
I want one of the box.
Oh, your box is good.
So we
He's
just
got one
like
of the box, I
one?
want one of the box.
Okay. I picked this as a poem appropriation wheel. This is by Robert Kinsky, who a couple of years ago was a National Poet Laureate. He's excellent. It's called Story. Where was the kiln? What was the clay? I immediately thought of the potter movie. What drove the wheel that turned the vessel? Who started the engines so late at night? Which was the highway across the hills? Why did the animal turn on its keeper? How did the preachers forge the bells? I drank the shadows, I studied the shell, I heard the rain, and I took the wheel. That's going in to be a wheel turner. So I leave you with that.
Thank you.
Thank you,